We're all familiar with the visionaries that have shaped our past, but what about the ones who are shaping our future? The ones who see what others don't, who challenge the status quo, who imagine a future not just as it is, but as it ought to be. On Visionaries, we'll dive deep with today's boldest thinkers, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs who are crafting the next chapter of our world. How do they see what's coming? How do they make the impossible inevitable? And how can we learn to think like them? Because the future belongs to those bold enough to imagine it. Today, we're joined by Cam Doody and Matt Patterson, co-founders and general partners at Brickyard. Before launching their pre-PMF venture firm in residency, they co-founded Bellhop, a tech-driven relocation company that moved over 350,000 households and raised $90 million in venture capital. Through Brickyard, they provide early-stage founders not just with capital, but operational support, accountability, and a community of builders. Let's dive in.
I mean, this entire conversation is really oriented around your vision for this space. This space is beautiful, it's inspiring, but there's a lot of really hard work. First, though, I would love for y'all to just sort of tell us the entrepreneurial journey thus far, and then we'll segue into the dawn of Brickyard.
Why don't you kick it off?
We founded our company, Bellhops, with our third co-founder, Stephen Vlahos. I mean, it kind of plays into what the Brickyard story is, which is, you know, we were raising our first round of funding, and we met these guys up here, Ted, Allen, and Barry, and they had this crazy idea of like, hey, move here and work out of our space with other VC-backed founders and, you know, just do this here for now. And we kind of jumped at the opportunity overnight to move. This was like October 2012. All three of us were newlyweds. You know, like my wife like had a great job. Like Cameron's wife had literally just started her own business like 2 weeks before.
Yep.
Stephen's wife had just started a 2-year grad program. So it was kind of a wild idea, but we ended up doing it and moving here pretty much overnight to start Bellhops. That's kind of how, you know, Brickyard formulated many years later, which is that we operated in this venture incubator for about 3 years before kind of scaling out and getting our own space.
So Matt and I actually worked at our first company out of college together, which was a big bank. It's a big multinational bank. You know, we say that and everyone's like, oh, yeah, with Goldman. He's like, no, we repinned people's debit cards in a bank branch in a mall parking lot in Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, we graduated right in the middle of the financial crisis. So like no one was hiring, and we just took the first job that we could get. Anyway, the first time we actually got to talk, I was like, okay, I can hang with this guy. Like we could do some cool stuff. And the bank was what you might think, you know, working in a bank right out of college, you know, you put the real world on a pedestal, and you're
Right.
like, oh, we're about to go to the moon, we're going to make all this money, and we're going to, you know, be super successful. And you kind of get hit in the face with, you're at the bottom of a 40-year totem pole, and you're just the bottom of the stack.
Right.
And so I think both of us were kind of quickly trying to figure out, you know, how can we move up in this thing and kind of separate from the pack. And so I ended up taking a job at a medical equipment company, and then almost immediately bringing Matt over to run it with me. It was a startup, and we opened up the state of Alabama together, and it was just Matt and me building this company. And we were there for, I guess, 2.5 years or so before we started Bellhops.
And that was a startup. So
Right.
that was our first real experience, like getting our hands dirty in a high, fast-growing company.
Yeah. And we were just working super closely together there. And then we came up with the idea for Bellhops, which at the time was called Dorm Movers. We were just moving college kids into the dorms. And then, so Matt and I actually quit on the same day. They made us think that we were just crazy for jumping in and doing this. And almost immediately after we moved to Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And that's when we really put the pedal down on Bellhops. And then we built that through the 20 teens and took the venture path and really started understanding the venture side of things. And then in 2019, late 2019, right before COVID, we sold part of the company. We stepped out of the day-to-day. Matt had actually stepped out about 2 years prior, had started another company, sold that company. And so we were both kind of free agents. I think at first assumed that we were just going to start another company. And I was like begging Matt. I was like, come on, like, what can we do? I was like throwing out all kinds of ideas. And ultimately we came back to this thing that we'd experienced at Lamppost back in 2012 to 2015, which was very similar to what we're doing at Brickyard. A group of really early stage companies that all build in the same place. And so that was Bellhops and Ambition and Steam Logistics and Reliance Partners and Chattanooga Whiskey and American Exchange and AT Carriers. And then 2 or 3 other companies that they funded. Well, 7 of those 10 companies are really big companies now. And there was just some magic that we knew that we wanted to replicate. And so we partnered up. We ended up partnering up with Ted Allen and Barry that started Lamppost, and with the mandate of let's take the real core of what made Lamppost really magic and just do it with more resources. And so that's when we bought this building and started sort of the early building blocks of what Brickyard is today.
I love it. Did you start Brickyard out of a desire to critique anything about your own experience with venture capital?
I would say yes. I have a pretty pointed perspective on this. Matt and I both do. ZERP really crippled venture in a lot of ways, but particularly early stage venture. And so when all this money was being crammed into venture capital chasing yield during the zero interest rate years, there was too much money, not enough deals, and so the industry had to make startups cool. And that's when the movies and the awards and the parties and celebrities and it was really good for later stage investors, Series A, B, C, and so on, because they didn't have to deal with the huge top of funnel increase of just founders coming to market. They could kind of sit back, like top of funnel was big, but like by the time companies were coming to them, it was only the winners that were actually making it to them. And so it made pre-seed and seed stage investing really hard because you kind of felt like you were a Rolex dealer in the 80s where your first order of business was identifying fakes because there are so many people becoming founders that weren't sort of neurotically drawn to it out of this is the only way that I can see my idea happen. And it just created a lot of noise in the space. And so by the time like 2020, 2021 rolled around, there was a huge bubble that started in venture where venture investors, they just had so much money. There were so many deals out. They were just throwing money around. And so we kind of knew this core issue. And so if we were going to go to the venture side of the table, we wanted to create something like really inconvenient and hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. We just wanted to talk to the dogs, just the junkyard dogs that had a problem that they just absolutely had to solve no matter what. And they were only focused on execution. And so we're in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and this is by no means anything comparable to the Bay Area or New York, and it's perfect for us because we can go and find these top tier founders and bring them to effectively a black site, like an island in the middle of the Pacific that no one really pays any attention to. And put them in an environment where they can just push super hard and they can be around a bunch of other founders that have come here to do the exact same thing. And we call that the trough of sorrow. And it's like the stage where you're post-raise, but you're pre-product market fit, and it is absolutely brutal. And the only thing that really helps teams in that stage, in our opinion, is being around other founders that are just pushing you. It's a really lonely pursuit during that, you're just chewing glass. It's a knife fight. And it really helps when you're around other people that are in that exact same scenario. So that's...
there's tons of accelerators. There's tons of sort of VC firms and programming that can get founders to their first fundraise and get them to a demo day. There's not really anything after that. There's not really anything for the pre-product market fit phase to get you to the Series A. And so we wanted to build this like founder mecca that's like purposely in the middle of nowhere that founders can kind of escape to to get to product market fit. And all the while, you're just surrounded by 50 other founders who are in the same stage, all fighting the same battle. They hold each other up. I mean, we are here every day. Like we sit out here just like they sit out here. They can come tap us on the shoulder anytime they want. We can jump in a room. But that's like 5% of the value of this place. Like the other 95% is like day in, day out, nights, Saturdays, Sundays. This place is full with other founders, and they're all just, they're all here on an island together. So this isn't some like glorified like co-working facility where the relationships are superficial. Like everyone's like stuck here for a long time until they figure it out. And so they're all down to hang and learn from each other.
I think an important piece to this, there's no time obligation.
Yep.
It took us a few iterations to really understand, how to structure this, but teams are now coming here on a mission. And so right before we offer terms to a team that we've been diligencing for a while, we ask the question, what are you coming to Brickyard to do in revenue, like sales? And the minimum is $1 million. Like you shouldn't pick up and move somewhere to put your head down unless you're going to get to $1 million in revenue. But teams are coming in and they're saying, look, we need to get to $2 million in revenue, because at $2 million in revenue, that's going to indicate that we're pretty close to a Series A, product market fit, et cetera, and right around the period where we're going to need to be scaling up our headcount in a major way. And so it's a forcing function to move to functionally the middle of nowhere to just hit a number.
Right.
And then, we've got the numbers on the wall over there, and every day teams are coming in and they're sort of competing with each other on, how fast can they get to their number. And so it, in a lot of ways, it just simplifies things for teams at this stage.
Yep. Knowing that the yard factors into your mission, and in a moment where everybody is, is remote the future, y'all double down on place. Why?
The tactical reason that we did it is this wouldn't have worked in San Francisco,
right,
or New York. If we started Brickyard in the Bay, it'd be another co-working space with a bunch of founding teams that don't really know each other, that don't really have a shared mission, that are sort of just like needing space.
Yep.
There wouldn't be any sacrifice to it. There wouldn't be that mission, the forcing function. And so in order to do this right, we had to do it in a place that was obscure in a way. And so that's sort of the tactical reason that we did it, where Chattanooga actually plays a very strategic role in our thesis.
Right.
You're not casually joining Brickyard. Personally, we love this place. We moved to Chattanooga with no expectation of how long we were going to be here.
Yep.
We came here for Lamppost to execute on our company. It was a great place to do it. We weren't really thinking about where we were going to be, but over time we started hiring people, and we kind of turned around one day and we had 30 employees in Chattanooga, and it was like, wow, okay, we have a Chattanooga presence, and we really love this place.
Right.
And for our company specifically, it made sense for us to build our company here. And a lot of our companies, it won't make sense to scale in Chattanooga, and we know that. There's no economic development purpose to Brickyard. We're purely about making founders go faster through just radical focus. Some are going to stay, some are going to go back to the Bay, back to New York, Boston, whatever. And I would anticipate, similar to what we experienced at Lamppost, once some of these founders have some exits and they're in their 30s and they want to start families and they're looking for quality of life, like they know Chattanooga, they've been here for multiple years.
Yep.
But that's not the core intention of Brickyard.
And how many companies, how many countries are represented, states represented from founders?
Probably 4 countries. There's 40 total companies that we've invested in 3.5 years. States, I don't know, maybe 20 or so. A lot of New York and California, though.
And y'all already, in 2 years of time, already have success stories, already have exits. Talk about your favorites.
Oh man, you can't play favorites in this
We're
game.
get in trouble.
The common theme between Brickyard founders is they're just the dogs. Our favorite founders are the founders that just 100% are all in and completely obsessed and are willing to do whatever it takes to make it work. And I think most of our companies fall into that bucket.
So I'll say we have a special place in our heart for Repower. Those were the first founders that actually moved here. That was basically our first deal.
Totally.
They were also the first company to get to Series A. They have a local presence here, and we're very proud of them. And feel free to add anything.
I tried to give a political answer.
Yeah. I'm glad we did, but let's give the people what they want.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go.
We gotta mention June. All right,
Yeah.
so June
Oh,
was
yeah.
the third team that we invested in, and they just like really bought into this place, and they were really helpful for us building, Brickyard, because we had no one knew what this was in the early days,
Yep.
and we're still very much under the radar. But when we were investing in our third company, like our deal flow just wasn't there. We weren't seeing a lot of companies. We come across this team June. We absolutely fall in love with the founders. And they sort of like helped establish this Bay Area pipeline. They sort of referred like the next 4th, 5th, 6th deal that we did. So got to shout out the June boys.
Yeah, no doubt.
And they're doing exceptionally well. They're back in the Bay Area. So they referred us Brev.
So Brev was our 4th investment that we made, a Bay Area company. One of these founders that you meet for the first time, and they just have it. And so Natter really, believed in us. He's very well served as a networker and a connector, and like he's just kind of this larger than life personality. But he decided to take capital from Brickyard, and then ultimately became our first exit. Brev sold to NVIDIA earlier this year, and we're still super close. So the Brev team, they come into Brickyard just about every quarter to do deep work. Once you get into Brickyard, you're a member for life. So these teams, even after you roll out, you're coming back, anytime you want. So that's really common.
All right, then tell us about the Coast founders.
Yeah. Okay.
They're the embodiment of the Brickyard founder.
So this building, it's on Main and Central, right across Main Street, about 100 yards this way. We bought a house that we call Brick House.
Of course.
So it's 11 bedrooms, fully furnished. And it's just an easy way. It's kind of a landing pad for teams that are coming from out of state. They can stay there before they go somewhere else for, sign a lease somewhere. So Spencer and Austin moved to Chattanooga just immediately. Like we had a first meeting. It was one of those things where, Matt and I met the team, and we just immediately bought them a plane ticket. And they came in, effectively never left. Spencer and Austin were in Brickyard. They lived at Brick House. They would arrive at Brickyard every morning at 9 a.m., and they would leave here at 3 a.m. every day, 7 days a week for a full year before moving to New York.
Yep.
And, we have one of these old school like analog time punchers, time clocks. And on Spencer's last week, he clocked like 118 hours in Brickyard. But the crazy thing is that week was no different than every other week that he was here. I mean, just a complete maniac. And so that's who we are building Brickyard on.
Yep.
Like, this is not a game that you can do kind of passively. Like, this is a full contact sport, and they are a total embodiment of that. And Coast is going to be a huge company. They're doing super well, scaling their team.
It's amazing.
All right, lastly, I'll shout out Carla and CJ with Shopee, international logistics company. They ended up like taking like a third of this building before we finally had to kick them out and get their own space. But just really exceptional founders, and we're so proud of what they've done. They've positioned their company here in Chattanooga as well.
Yeah, they're unbelievable.
I love it. Well, last question, but a personal question for you both. Just knowing the startup scene, building a venture is brutal, it's heartbreaking, and this entire place is sort of oriented around the pain of it all. What's the first principle that has kept you going? Because 15 plus years in venture, leading companies, building companies, is a long time.
I think it's a drug. The early days of company building are, I've never done heroin, but it is a massively addictive thing.
Yes.
And it can be super brutal. In the moment, the first few years of any company suck. If you categorize your days by like great days, good days, bad days, and terrible days, like it's 90% terrible days.
Right.
But when you're out of them and you're looking back on that time, somehow, and this is like a testament to the resiliency of humans, you'd forget all the pain and you just remember those,
The good old days.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so once you experience that, and even when you scale out of it and your company starts to get bigger, you're always kind of, dreaming about those early days, and when you could show up and change the direction of the company, in an afternoon, and you could actually make real impact. You're not trying to optimize some metric by like 1% month over month, And so this is honestly, in a big way, sort of a selfish pursuit for Matt and I, Ted, Allen, and Barry.
Yep.
It's sort of our portal back to those days.
Yep.
It's actually interesting. So Lamppost Group was named after Lost, the TV show. And, it's a show about a bunch of strangers, marooned on an island together.
I remember.
It's like 8 seasons, 20
Right.
episodes a season of trying to get off the island. And then when they finally get off the island, all they want to do is go back.
Yep.
And the portal in Lost that allowed you to go back was called the Lamppost. So Brickyard is very much,
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
yeah. Should have given that earlier. I don't think anybody's watching Lost anymore.
What about you, Matt?
I think just getting something off the ground is so thrilling. Part of the allure of it. The most fun days are when you've got like early signs of product market fit, like something's clicking. I mean, growth cures all, like when you're actually growing something. But then like building like the initial DNA of a team is so much fun, because there's this saying that like the first 20 people you hire like sets the DNA of a company like for life. Like Amazon is basically, the culture of Amazon set in place from the first 20 people that join the company. And so like molding that in the first 20 people of your business, I mean, that's just a fascinating experience.
100%.
What are some of the things you've learned since the first round of ventures that you've applied to this current round? And what are you already planning to change for the next?
Okay, well, in the first part of the question, in our first fund, we didn't have our building yet, and we didn't quite know what our model was going to be, and we were using our own capital for this reason. Like, we didn't want to raise money from other people until we knew really what our model was going to be. And, the first fund, I can definitively say that, like, the companies that, like, did pick up and move here and, like, did exactly, like, what Brickyard's ethos is, which is, like, putting your head down and executing for a long period of time, in one room with a bunch of founders. I mean, those companies are definitively doing better than the ones that didn't do it. And that was our big mistake in the early days, in that we were very like flexible with our model.
Right.
We some companies we sort of allowed to be here for like a month or maybe even like 2 weeks. And going from fund 1 to fund 2, and that's the big thing we got rid of immediately, which is like, we're not going to bend on our principles. We're going to ask founders to commit to doing this, and if they're not into it, then that's good for us, because they filtered themselves out of like what we believe in.
Last question. What about your experience scaling and exiting Bellhops was formative to the experience of Brickyard?
It's funny. I think any founder who's built a company, they think that it's going to be easier the second time around. So I think every founder that starts a company and is successful in that, they assume their second pursuit is going to be, easier than it was the first time. And, Brickyard's we're a venture firm, we're not a company, but there is a Brickyard product that we have to build. And I think it's more than anything, it's just been a reminder that anytime you set out to build something again, you're always dealing with a totally new problem set that you have to obsess over. If there's one thing that we have done with Brickyard, is just trusting our instincts from the beginning. We kind of really early on, to Matt's point, started bending on a little of our, initial intuition on how this should be built, and we were just immediately smacked in the hand on it. And so it was just a clean adjustment to be like, all right, we were right, and we need to stick with that, or maybe we're not right,
Right.
But at least we're gonna see it out, and we're gonna play out our vision as we originally saw it.
Well said. No, I don't have anything to add.
Nothing to add? Awesome.